Hello, welcome to History Done Right. My name is Timothy Barrett. I am the host, I guess, of History Done Right. This is a weekly series that we do. Bradford Christian College and Covenant Academy Online sponsor, and we are wanting to do history right because A, we need to, and B, it is important in terms of really properly understanding God's hand in history, his providential role, and how it is that things have gone the way that they've gone, and it helps us understand where we're at today. Um, yeah, so it's it's really important, and so I would encourage you, if you're new to this series, go to the Bradford Christian College YouTube channel, click on the History Done Right playlist, and you'll find all the episodes that we have streamed so far. I would encourage you to go back to the first 3 episodes if you haven't viewed those episodes, and that's where you can really get a foundation of what we mean by history done right, and that's really important. It's and if you took some time and gave it some thought, you would agree that doing history right is really important, and you would recognize that there are many ways in which we have been influenced by wrong views of history, and that gives us wrong interpretations of events and leads us to wrong conclusions about circumstances that we face today. So I'd encourage you to do that. By the way, you saw in the intro our sponsors, Bradford Christian College. Go to bradfordchristiancollege.com and you'll see a link in the description below. If not now, it will be there eventually. I forget whether I got those into the description before we started tonight. But anyway, bradfordchristiancollege.com. I encourage you to check it out. Look at the degree programs they have, a number of bachelor's degrees, a Master of Arts in theology. And I'm confident that if you give it a close look, you'll see that it could be the college for you. It can give you an opportunity to not disrupt your life by I don't, well, I'll just say it, not disrupt your life by ending up at some college campus someplace with all the uncertainties that can be involved in being in that scenario. It can allow you to, if you're in a situation where you're working and you need something that is easily adjustable to the schedule that you have, Bradford Christian College is a great choice. But you're not alone. It's not like you're just left with trying to plod your way through whatever the subject matter is. A mentor is assigned to you who walks with you through your program. You have a chance to ask questions. You can be challenged by the mentor and such. And so I think it's a for this day and age, I think it is a perfect option for college level education. So check it out, bradfordchristiancollege.com. Also, Covenant Academy Online. You can contact me at tbarrett at covenantacademyonline.com. And let's talk. You're homeschooling, maybe. You've got a number of children. You need some time to work with one group of your children and make sure the other group are in something challenging and productive and interesting. Covenant Academy Online can help. You're part of a co-op, right? And you have a number of students that would love to take a particular course, but you just don't have parents ready to step up or able to step up and teach that. Covenant Academy Online can help, whether it's physics, chemistry, forensic science, just a unit on the Cold War itself or the Vietnam War. Pretty much any subject matter you can think of or your students can think of, Covenant Academy Online can put something together to walk students through that subject. Perhaps your church has a small Christian school, and now you've got these 2 high school students that need chemistry, need algebra 2 or even pre-calculus, and you don't have the teacher for it. Covenant Academy Online can help. So use Covenant Academy Online as a resource. Again, contact me at tbarrett@covenantacademyonline.com. and let me know what you need. And let's start a discussion. Let's get something organized for you. And it doesn't matter if it's for one student or 30 students. We're happy to explore our options and see about getting something organized that can be helpful to you. Okay? All right, enough intro. Let's talk history, and we'll start here with our timeline, just to remind ourselves where we're at. Noah's family come off the ark. They've received God's word as far as um, their mandate, you could say. Very similar to the mandate given to Adam at the garden, but it does include this feature of what we could call the institution of civil government, particularly seen in the death penalty. And I know that, well, I don't know this, I guess. Well, maybe I do know. I don't know. I am aware of um, professing Christians that make very strong arguments against the death penalty. And I have a difficult time with their arguments against the death penalty. I think the scriptures are very clear. The circumstances under which the penalty is to be death. And it doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't necessarily sit comfortably on our shoulders, but it seems to be clearly enunciated. Genesis chapter 9. Okay, now we're in the year 1657, 1658 Anno Mundi. That's in the year of the Earth. The last episode, we looked at the blessings and the curse that Noah spoke over his sons. And we considered the consequences of that because, Noah is effectively speaking God's word. He's declaring God's word to his sons. And so what he declares to them will come to pass because that's the nature of God's word. It comes to pass. And so we want to keep that in mind, especially as we're studying history through the Old Testament, but not just the Old Testament period, into the New Testament period as well, because when we read that history and we read what God's word is, that's something that will come to pass, and we need to watch for it. You understand that that's telling us what will come to pass. Okay, so now in Ussher's history at this point, what he calls the second age of the world, this is post-flood, okay? Just looking at his scripture references here, Genesis 8, 14 through 19, and then Genesis 8 into Genesis 9. And then his next date that he gives, 1658, he references Genesis 11. And I think pretty much he's in Genesis 11. I think at some points he kind of refers back to Genesis 10, and we'll see why he does that in a moment. But Genesis 11, I think, is where history picks up again. When we're in Genesis 10, what we have are sometimes Genesis 10 is called the Table of Nations. It starts this way. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog and Madai, and Javan and Tubal and Meshach and Tiras. I apologize if I'm butchering the pronunciation there. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz and Riphath and Torgama, and the sons of Javan, Elisha and Tarshish, Kittim and Dodanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. Okay, so let me see if we can do this. Oh, let's not do that yet. So the the table of nations here in verse 2 begins with the sons of Japheth. Okay, and Japheth is the firstborn of Noah. Okay, so that makes sense. You'd start with the firstborn. Um, and notice with Japheth, we end up with Gomer, Magog. Whoops, didn't want that. Let's see if we can. Let's try this again. I'm going to go back to my pencil here, and let's just underline Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, Tiras. Okay, so those are the sons of Japheth. 7 sons. Japheth had the most number of sons. Remember, that was part of the blessing that was spoken over Japheth, was that he'd grow big. Well, not necessarily he would grow big, but you know what I'm saying. There were a lot of kids. Now, Gomer, I'm going to assume Gomer is the firstborn. I'm going to assume that the sons there are given in order. When I look at my wall chart, yeah, it says that's the order as well. Okay, so Gomer has these sons: Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Torgama. And then Javan, the sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. Okay, so so that would say that what we're told, at least this far, is that Gomer and Javan had sons. So those are the 2 sons that are named as having sons. All right. So what it tells us is that the Isles of the Gentiles seems to be where these descendants settled. But here's something I want you to notice about the nations that come from these individuals. Right? They were divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families. Okay. Now, I'm not gonna say that this is, the definitive definition of what makes a nation. I think it's worth noting that this is how the Bible speaks of their nations, that they shared a border, a land, right? That land had defined borders, that they shared a language, and they shared a heritage, you could say. They shared a kinship. They shared coming from the same family, right? There were those kinds of elements that seem to be um, the elements that identify a nation, right? So you've got borders, you've got language, you've got, I'm going to say heritage, right? You got shared borders, shared language, shared heritage. All right, let's see what Matthew Henry says here. Moses begins he says Moses begins because we accept Moses as the author of Genesis, the divinely inspired author of Genesis, with Japheth's family, either because he was the oldest or because his family lay remotest from Israel and had least concern with them at the time when Moses wrote. And therefore, he mentions that race very briefly, hastening to give an account of the posterity of Ham, who were Israel's enemies, and of Shem, who were Israel's ancestors. Okay, I think that makes sense what Matthew Henry is saying, right? So Moses doesn't ignore that there was a firstborn, right? But in the context of when he's writing and for whom he is writing, those are people far off. Remember, this Moses made the same argument. I mean, Matthew Henry made the same argument, and I'm going to pause right there for just a moment. I'm going to apologize if I'm a little bit off tonight. The air quality here is really bad. We're getting smoke from fires, distant fires, and it's really affecting me. All right, so if I seem a little bit distracted or whatever, that's my excuse. Okay. Anyway, I mean, the smoke is, for me, the smoke is bad enough that it's actually coating my tongue. And I know I probably shouldn't have my window open here, but my window's open. And anyway, back to this. Matthew Henry may not be correct in this, but at least he's consistent, right? Because when he looked at that passage where Noah curses Canaan, the son of Ham, and like, well, why didn't he curse Ham? Well, I think we're to understand he did, and Canaan is included in that because Canaan is a son of Ham. And the reason why Moses names Canaan is because he's writing for an audience that is concerned about the Canaanites. Who are these people? Why are they such an enemy to us? Ooh, there was a curse. Okay. And I think Matthew Henry then is consistent here in indicating why there's such brevity regarding Japheth's family, mentioned but not dwelt on too long. Okay, Matthew Henry continues. Observe, one, notice is taken that the sons of Noah had sons born to them after the flood to repair and rebuild the world of mankind, which the flood had ruined. He that had killed now makes alive. Two, the posterity of Japheth were allotted to the isles of the Gentiles, which were solemnly by lot, after a survey, divided among them, and probably this island of ours among the rest. All places beyond the sea from Judea are called isles. He references Jeremiah 25. And this directs us to understand that promise, Isaiah 42. I had to remember my Roman numerals there. Isaiah 42. The isles shall wait for his law, of the conversion of the Gentiles to the faith of Christ. Okay, so Matthew Henry looks at this and says, he's talking about lands that are removed from where Moses is at the time of this writing, the descendants of Shem, and then the surrounding descendants of Ham that are a source of trouble. All right. Let's continue on. Verse 6. Verse 6. And the sons of Ham. Okay, so now we're moving on to Ham, who is the youngest, the lastborn. So we started with the firstborn. Now we've gone to the lastborn. And so that would suggest that, okay, Moses isn't writing in order of birth. He's writing in, what would you say? He is writing, narrowing in on the descendants of Shem, right? And so the descendants of Japheth are not particularly a concern to Moses and the Israelites at the time Moses is writing. They're far off peoples. The descendants of Ham, some in particular, are of particular concern, particular trouble to the descendants of Shem, and then he'll, I presume, conclude with the descendants of Shem. But now he takes on the sons of Ham, takes them on, I mean, he identifies them, and the sons of Ham turn out to be Cush, Mizraim, Put or Put, I'm not sure the pronunciation there, and Canaan. Okay, so Ham has 4 sons. He has the fewest sons of the 3 sons of Noah. Okay, so let's take on Cush. The sons of Cush, Seba and Havilah and Sabta, and Rama. Oh, and Sabteka. So Cush, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sons. And then the sons of Rama. Okay, so let's think about this. Ham has a son Cush. Cush has a son Rama. And now the sons of Rama. So we're going to, right, Cush, the son of Ham. Rama, the grandson of Ham. And now we're going to the great-grandsons of Ham. So the sons of Rama here would be Sheba and Dedan. But then Moses returns to Cush, and Cush begat Nimrod. And it says here that Nimrod began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom, that would be Nimrod. Okay, so the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh and the city Rehoboth and Calah. And Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, the same as a great city. And okay, and so we're going to stop there. So this is specifically from Cush. Matthew Henry will clear this all up for us, but specifically from Cush, Nimrod, who establishes this kingdom of Babel. And these other cities that come out of, I would say, the work that Nimrod begins. Okay, now we come to Mizraim, who is another son of Ham. So we have Mizraim. He begat Ludim and Anamim, Leabim, and Naphtuhim, and Pathrusim, and Cashluhim, out of whom came Philistim. We'll see what Matthew Henry says about that. And Caphtorim. Okay. So, I mean, you can see there's a lot more detail given here about the descendants of Ham than than was given regarding the descendants of Japheth. Okay, let's see what Matthew Henry says here. That which is observable and improvable is the account given of Nimrod. He is here represented as a great man in his day. He began to be a mighty one in the earth, that is, whereas those that went before him were content to stand upon the same level with their neighbors And though every man bore rule in his own house, yet no man pretended any further. Nimrod's aspiring mind could not rest here. He was resolved to tower above his neighbors, not only to be eminent among them, but to lord it over them. To lord it over them. Oh, it's not the color I wanted, but to lord it over them. The same spirit that actuated the giants before the flood, who became mighty men and men of renown, now revived in him. So soon was that tremendous judgment which the pride and tyranny of those mighty men brought upon the world forgotten. No, there are some in whom ambition and affection of dominion seem to be bred in the bone. Such there have been and will be, notwithstanding the wrath of God, often revealed from heaven against them. Nothing on this side of hell will humble and break the proud spirits of some men in this like Lucifer. Okay, so Nimrod would seem to be a resurgence of that same spirit that we saw before the flood in the so-called giants, the mighty men, the men of renown prior to the flood. And so to me, that would just suggest that the seed of that character, that temper, that makeup in a person is rooted in the sinful nature. And what we see clearly here is that the sinful nature survived through the flood because the sinful nature is in Noah and his sons. And this shouldn't surprise us because we've already seen Noah's sin in his drunkenness, and then Ham's sin in the horribly disgusting disrespect towards his father. And now we have Nimrod. And not surprisingly, Nimrod in that line of Ham. Right? Nimrod, the grandson of Ham. Okay, Matthew Henry's going to go on about Nimrod here and give us more detail. And I'm actually going to do something that's, I guess, maybe not professional here, but I realize I want to grab a reference book. So I'm going to mute my camera. You'll still be able to hear me as I roll my chair. Ooh, that noise isn't helpful. To grab a book off my shelf. And see if I can find what I'm thinking about here. Guess I can restore my camera. I'm back in place now. Can't really see anything, but Nimrod. And it could be that we'll come to this later, but I'm pretty sure yeah. Maybe we will. Surprised I don't have this. Sorry, now I'm wondering. Three races. Okay, so that's that, right? Okay, so we will come to this. Okay, so just was checking my outline of things. So yeah, what we're talking about here, I think that we're going to come back to this in future episodes as we we're going to look at some histories outside of the Bible and see what they have to say about some things. And I think we're going to find some interesting histories about Nimrod. We'll see what Matthew Henry has to say here about Nimrod, because he's going to tell us some specifics about what we know about Nimrod from the scriptures. Nimrod was a great hunter. With this he began, and for this became famous to a proverb. Every great hunter is in remembrance of him, called a Nimrod. Some think he did good in his hunting, served his country by ridding it of the wild beasts which infested it, and so insinuated himself into the affections of his neighbors and got to be their prince. Those that exercise authority either are or at least would be called benefactors. 2. Others think that under pretense of hunting, he gathered men under his command in pursuit of another game he had to play, which was to make himself master of the country and to bring them into subjection. He was a mighty hunter. That is, he was a violent invader of his neighbor's rights and properties, and a persecutor of innocent men, carrying all before him and endeavoring to make all his own by force and violence. He thought himself a mighty prince, but before the Lord, that is in God's account, he was but a mighty hunter. Okay, so Matthew Henry puts forth two possibilities of understanding Nimrod. And I don't know that he's saying that one is preferred over the other. It doesn't seem to be. He just says this is one way he's viewed, and this is a second way he's viewed. So let's keep those in mind, those two views there. And I think that at some point here we'll be looking at other histories and considering how they talk about or present Nimrod in those histories. Okay. Matthew Henry goes on. Note, great conquerors are but great hunters. Alexander and Caesar would not make such a figure in scripture history as they do in common history. The former, Alexander, is represented in prophecy, but as a he-goat pushing, Daniel 8:5. Nimrod was a mighty hunter against the Lord, so the Septuagint. So that's interesting. So in Hebrews, Genesis 10, verse 9, the word before, a turning toward another direction. Strong says it's used in a great variety of applications. Against, there's a whole list of possible translations. But against is one of them. So that's interesting that the Septuagint, that's what this LXX is referring to, the Septuagint, suggesting that, all right, so the Septuagint is the Greek Old Testament. And it's suggesting that it should be not before the Lord, but against the Lord. So that's pretty interesting to consider if that's perhaps the better translation. Let's see where Matthew Henry goes with that. So Nimrod was a mighty hunter against the Lord. Again, that's the Septuagint. That is, he set up idolatry, as Jeroboam did, for the confirming of his usurped dominion. That he might set up a new government, he set up a new religion upon the ruin of the primitive constitution of both. Babel was the mother of harlots. Okay, so that is one way in which it could be said that Nimrod was a mighty hunter against the Lord. Number two, he carried on his oppression and violence in defiance of God himself, daring heaven with his impieties, as if he and his huntsmen could outbrave the Almighty and were a match for the Lord of hosts and all his armies. As if it were a small thing to weary men, he thinks to weary my God also. Isaiah 7. So Matthew Henry is suggesting that there may be a more wicked side to what is very briefly stated here in Genesis about Nimrod. So let's keep that in mind, and we may get some sense of this in the readings that we look at in future episodes. Okay, so Nimrod was a great ruler. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Some way or other, by arts or arms, he got into power, either being chosen to it or forcing his way to it, and so laid the foundations of a monarchy, which was afterwards a head of gold and the terror of the mighty, and bade fair to be universal. It does not appear that he had any right to rule by birth, but either his fitness for government recommended him, as some think, to an election, or by power and policy advanced gradually and perhaps insensibly into the throne. See the antiquity of civil government, and particularly that form of it which lodges the sovereignty in a single person. If Nimrod and his neighbors began, other nations soon learned to incorporate under one head for their common safety and welfare. Okay, so this is interesting because Matthew Henry is suggesting that here is where we see the beginning of monarchy, right? We see the beginning of lodging the sovereignty in a single person. Okay, now I think we all agree that Nimrod is not a good man. And I would just suggest that it could be a good rule of thumb to not follow the plans of bad men, right? But I guess you'd have to acknowledge that just because the first monarchy was started by a bad man doesn't necessarily mean that monarchy itself is bad, right? So I guess we want to be mindful of that. And, I think that monarchy is not the right form of government to desire. But I think it would be fallacious to say, well, since monarchy started with Nimrod, monarchy is therefore bad. All right. Nimrod was a great builder. So he was a great hunter, a great ruler, a great builder. Now, one of the things that I think is helpful to keep in mind here, let me see if I can get confirmation of this. I'm going to my Webster's 1828. And great. When we think of great today, oh, that's great. We think it's the best. We think it's the number one, the supreme, right? And that's not how great is being used here. Webster's first definition of great is large in bulk or dimensions, a term of comparison denoting more magnitude or extension than something else. Okay, so and then you could say, oh well, yeah, but he's talking about physical dimensions. Yes, but the intent there, that it's a term of comparison. It's denoting more magnitude or extension, right? Um, the the first great commandment, the greatest commandment, that's the commandment that is the farthest extending commandment, right? It's not saying that's number one on the list. It's saying that's the one that has the greatest extension, the greatest reach. Okay. Webster, in his sixth definition, says important, weighty, as a great argument, great event, um, chief of vast power and excellence, supreme, illustrious, as the great God, the great creator. Um, so my point is, when Matthew Henry says Nimrod was a great hunter, a great ruler, a great builder, he's not saying Nimrod was the best hunter, the best ruler, or the best builder. He's saying that he had the most renown. Um, he was the most well known. He became, you could say, maybe the most powerful in that regard. Okay, so continuing on. Probably he was architect in the building of Babel, and there he began his kingdom. But when his project to rule all the sons of Noah was baffled by the confusion of tongues, out of that land he went forth into Assyria and built Nineveh, that having built these cities he might command them and rule over them. Observe in Nimrod the nature of ambition. It is boundless. Much would have more and still cries, give, give. Much would have more and still cries, give, give. It is restless. This is Matthew Henry describing the nature of ambition, in particular, the ambition that we see in Nimrod. Nimrod, when he had 4 cities under his command, could not be content till he had 4 more. It is expensive. Nimrod will rather be at the charge of rearing cities than not have the honor of ruling them. The spirit of building is the common effect of a spirit of pride. Huh. That's something that could be worth taking time to just meditate upon for a while. The spirit of building is the common effect of a spirit of pride. The spirit of building is the common effect of a spirit of pride. Okay, so the one thing that comes into my mind is the obvious pride exhibited in those who built the Titanic and declared it an unsinkable ship, right? The spirit of building is the common effect of a spirit of pride. All right. This ambition that we see in Nimrod is also daring and will stick at nothing. Okay, so that means um, nothing will stop its momentum. Nimrod's name signifies rebellion, which, if indeed he did abuse his power to the oppression of his neighbors, teaches us that tyrants to men are rebels to God. And their rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Okay, so that phrase, tyrants to men are rebels to God, is a very interesting phrase. I don't know if Thomas Jefferson read Matthew Henry, but What is it? Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God, something like that. I don't know. Okay, so here's the thing. When we get to this point with Matthew Henry talking about the circumstance of Nimrod, in particular the ambition of Nimrod, and how Nimrod's name signifies rebellion, right? So it makes it difficult to me, for me, to like back here where we read about Nimrod was a great hunter, to accept this first supposing. Some think he did good with his hunting, served his country by ridding it of the wild beasts which infested it, and so insinuated himself into the affections of his neighbors. Others think that under pretense of hunting, he gathered men under his command in pursuit of another game. Right? This description of Nimrod was a great hunter seems to fit the Nimrod who is rebellious. Okay. Now, I suppose it's possible that Nimrod starts very good-heartedly in his hunting, and then is filled with pride with his success and such. I suppose that's possible. And then Nimrod was a great ruler, and here Matthew Henry says, some way or other, by arts or arms, he got into power, either being chosen to it or forcing his way to it. Well, the forcing his way to it seems to fit, the descriptor that we just read. But, I don't know. I guess it could be that, he demonstrates himself skillful in a particular way, and the people say, yeah, we'd love for you to be in charge. And, then he gets all prideful in that. I guess. But when Matthew Henry gets to this, Nimrod was a great builder, he seems to not have any hesitation to portray Nimrod as only bad, right? And he focuses in on this ambition of Nimrod. As I said, in future episodes, we're going to be reading from other histories outside of the Bible, and I think that some of those histories are going to give us some more information to consider regarding Nimrod. All right, so that's that section. So we've looked at the descendants of Japheth. That was pretty brief. And the idea is that Moses began there because those are of least interest at the time he's writing to the audience to whom he is writing. He spends more time, more detail with the sons of Ham, and in particular, the circumstance of Nimrod, because this is of greater immediate concern to his audience being the descendants of Shem. And so the next section, that was through verse 14 of chapter 10. We're now at verse 15 of chapter 10. We see that he's going to continue with descendants of Ham. And, this is really significant because remember, when Moses relates the story of Noah's cursing Ham, Moses names Canaan. And remember, Matthew Henry suggested that, well, he's doing that because that name Canaan would be more meaningful to his audience, because that's who they're dealing with. They're the Canaanites at the time that Moses is writing. And so this section then becomes of particular interest. And so he tells us, Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgasite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite, and afterward were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. Okay, so um, it's in this case not necessarily naming um, except for what the first two, Seth, Sidon, and Heth. The rest are people groups that all descend from Canaan and were spread abroad. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as you come to Gerar unto Gaza, as you go unto Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah and Zeboim, even unto Lasha. And you can all make fun of me in the comments for my lousy pronunciation. These are the sons of Ham after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. Okay, and I would just point out again that we come to this point where the Bible is going to talk about these nations, and it talks about borders, shared language, and shared, I'll say, heritage. Okay, I mean, what makes a nation? I think it's a legitimate question to ask, and I think that the Bible here gives us some direction as to what are the things that make a nation, right? I'll just leave it at that. Okay, so this would be if you're doing this, if by chance, you're following along in this series and you're thinking, hey, this would be great to have the whole family gather around. We can listen to the great Mr. Barrett expound on this history, and we can get this nailed down. And this would be a great moment here to do some geography work, right? Because he starts identifying geographic locations that are, in some way, kind of outline the border of the Canaanites. And who are the Canaanites? They're those that descended from Canaan. All these ites that we just read about here. And so you could actually do some geography work and familiarize yourself with these geographic locations, and maybe there's a way to dot it and come up with kind of a region or an area that would represent where these Canaanites were located. Let's see how Matthew Henry deals with it. Observe here, 1, the account of the posterity of Canaan, of the families and nations that descended from him, and of the land they possessed, is more particular than of any other. Why? Because these were the nations that were to be subdued before Israel. And their land was in process of time to become the Holy Land, Emmanuel's land. And this God had an eye to when, in the meantime, he cast the lot of that accursed, devoted race in that spot of ground, which he had selected for his own people. Okay, there's a lot packed into I guess that sentence began way up here. And that was all one sentence. Well, actually, where I stopped, it wasn't even the end of the sentence. There's a lot to take into account here. And again, if you're using this as a opportunity to study history with your family, your children, that accursed, devoted race, that's something to consider. And I would say consider not because you're going to use this to identify some people that you're never going to associate with or something. That's not the point. The question is, why does Matthew Henry describe them as an accursed devoted race. What does that mean, and what does that relate to? Well, accursed curse, right? It's got to relate to God's word that came through Noah. And the next thing to contemplate is why those people are in the spot of ground that had been selected for God's own people. Why is that happening? And this illustrates. I mean, in this day and age, people try to make history such a simple thing. And if you were, like in this country, well, I guess the history of America is just bad. But yeah, I guess if you're, it's kind of gotten to the point where, if you're European white, bad, right? If you're indigenous people, so called, good. And things are a lot more complicated than that. Things are complicated because people are complicated, and people are capable of multiple motives, and sometimes contradictory motives at any time, that lead to any particular action. And you just have to acknowledge this. And so it makes history a lot more interesting when you're not so adamant that if a particular person or people in history fit a particular profile that you've created today, that necessarily defines them. And it's like, well, no. I mean, I think most people today would probably consider it shocking that chances are very good that if they were born somewhere in the world um, in the 1600s or 1700s, probably they would just be accepting of the fact that there is an institution of slavery because it was everywhere. Now, I guess that's not guaranteed. I mean, there were people that argued against slavery, not very many, it seems. It took quite some effort to yell down the institution of slavery, but my guess is that chances are pretty good that you know people today that decry slavery um, would probably have just been accepting of it and lived their life, accepting of it, kind of the way that maybe many people do with abortion today, or what have you. And in fact, that even those who decry slavery today seem to be okay with the slavery that goes on today. um, so my point is, history is more complicated than many people think of it. And one of the reasons it's complicated is that, to some extent, it's a mystery as to what it is and why it is that God is doing what He is doing. And this can be a helpful part of the study of history, is because we want to always be watching for God's hand in history. All right. And we want to always acknowledge that whatever events we're studying, the only reason or the primary reason that those events are taking place is because God ordained them to take place. And sometimes what God has ordained to take place seems very disturbing to us. Like, why? Why? I don't understand why. Um, and so the answer to that, sometimes we come to understand as maybe we read further history, right? We can understand why God directed things the way that He did. Maybe we can't. Ultimately, the answer is not necessarily emotionally or psychologically satisfying, but it's nevertheless true that God ordains whatsoever comes to pass for His own good purposes and His own glory. And um, I might not that might not sit comfortably with me, depending on what the event is, or um, whatever I'm considering. Right? I mean, I'm not saying that the young married couple that unexpectedly loses their newborn, um, that, as a mature Christian, you should just walk up to and say, well, whatever God ordains to come to pass is for his good purposes and his glory. Like, well, that may be true. I think it is true, but it's not necessarily going to be emotionally or psychologically satisfying. And I think in some of those circumstances, you just sit quietly and you share pain, right? You just share the human experience of knowing that um, these things happen. And I think a study of history can help us with that as well. That there are, even today, when we study history from long ago, there are mysteries still, and those mysteries, right? Remember, our foundation stone is the providential view of history. That God is working out history for his own purposes and for his own glory. And so when I read something and I think, well, why did it happen this way? And I don't know, that mystery is to remind me that God works out history for his own purposes and for his own glory. And I need to submit to that. I'm not satisfied. My dissatisfaction should motivate me to study further to see if I can come to some better understanding. But ultimately, that mystery reminds me that God's providential hand is guiding and directing history for his own purposes and for his own glory. And I am not necessarily emotionally or psychologically satisfied with that, but I need to submit to that. I need to surrender to that. I need to throw off my foolish autonomy and humbly submit to the overriding, overarching hand of God that guides the affairs of men. All right. If that made sense to you and was meaningful, I'm glad. um, I certainly went farther than I thought I would do in this, but it was such a long sentence packed with such truth that we were reading there. Okay, so I guess we're getting to a point where we need to wrap up. Observe here the account of the posterity of Canaan, and again, the idea that these baddies, we could say, end up in the spot where God said, "My children, that's your land." And number two, by this account, it appears that the posterity of Canaan were numerous and rich and very pleasantly situated, and yet Canaan was under a curse, a divine curse, and not a curse causeless. Okay, so think about what this means. Okay, the Canaanites, the baddies, numerous, seemingly rich, seemingly pleasantly situated, right? That's the external. Okay, that's the material. That's the visible, right? But the truth is, under a curse, not just a curse, but a divine curse. And not a curse causeless, right? There was a cause for that curse. Remember the sin of Ham. And so here we have one of the most important lessons that we need to get straight. Those that are under the curse of God may yet perhaps thrive and prosper greatly in this world. For we cannot know love or hatred, the blessing or the curse, by what is before us, but by what is within us. Okay. I'm telling you, we all need to read Matthew Henry a lot more and a lot more. um, we cannot know love or hatred, the blessing. Wish I could draw a straight line. Um, no love or hatred, the blessing or the curse, by what is before us, but by what is within us. So that's such a powerful turn of phrase. The curse of God always works really and always terribly, but perhaps it is a secret curse, a curse to the soul, and does not work visibly or a slow curse and does not work immediately, but sinners are by it reserved for and bound over to a day of wrath. Canaan here has a better land than either Shem or Japheth, and yet they have a better lot, and yet they have a better lot, for they inherit the blessing. This they is Shem and Japheth. You know, and this is where I'll end. Part of living out the Christian faith is knowing this, right? The curse of God always works really, always terribly. It may be secret, it may be a curse to the soul, it may not be working visibly, it may be slow and not immediately, but sinners are by it reserved for and bound over to the day of wrath, right? And I would suggest as Christians, and I think this is a lesson that history can do well to teach us. As Christians, our faith of what is accomplished by Christ for our salvation should be as strong as possible in the work of Christ. But our faith needs to be as strong as possible in the accomplishment of God carrying out his curse on the wicked. And it clearly it should be right in the forefront of our mind, the salvific work of Christ and what that means to us. But it should also be in the forefront of our mind, the wrath of God and what that means to us, right? And when I say us, I just mean collective mankind. I think that's a tremendous lesson that comes from history done right. You see what I did there, right? History done right. You get to understand an important lesson like that just as powerful and effective and as present in history as the anticipated work of Christ and then the historic work of Christ that is continuing to have its effect today is the judgment of God, the wrath, the curse, right? The curse under which obstinate sinners must live. And that curse is working, really working, terribly working. It may be in secret. It's a curse to the soul. It may not be seen visibly. It may be slow in its work, not happening immediately, but it's there. And man, we need to be mindful of that, very mindful of that. All right, that's where we're going to have to end this time. So we're in Genesis chapter 10. We're going through the table of nations, and we're seeing where the various people groups come from. Remember what we said, that when Noah and his family came off the ark, every nation and people group and ethnicity that has been and is today descends from them. And as God dealt with that family that came off the ark, God was dealing with all the nations of the earth and those representatives. And we're beginning to see in this chapter, which is not so much history as an annal, right, is giving us a listing of the people groups that come forth from the family of Noah. And man, there's some powerful lessons that can be part of any study of history at this point. And I hope you're seeing that. I hope you're valuing that. And I hope that you'll continue to follow this series, that you will do the don't think I ever put this up, did I? But you should do the like and subscribe thing. Click the bell for notifications, and share this video. Leave a comment below. All of those good things, and please do join us, Lord willing, next week as we continue our series, History Done Right. Love to have you continue to be a part of this series. So for now, God bless, and we hope to see you in future episodes.